With the announcement of the Switch 2 and its price, Nintendo has done multiple things out of character for the company, one of which will either be revolutionary and a first of in the case of the gaming space, or completely ruin the sales of Switch 2. Let's get into it. Nintendo is often considered the company that does things a little different. Out of the three major consoles in modern times, we often see them experimenting with motion controls, two screens, consoles with a handle. Let's just say we aren't seeing generic Nintendo Console 1, generic Nintendo Console 2, and generic Nintendo Console 3 over and over again. Nintendo leans into what most of us have forgotten. Video games are a form of playing. What we once rated primarily on the space of how fun it was has moved on to, are the graphics good, is the music captivating, is the story groundbreaking? Imagine for a moment in any other industry being held to the standard of having to be the best constantly. We don't judge movies so harshly that they only score well if it's a new feat of storytelling. Instead, we acknowledge that a lot of films are going to be good, some will be great, and very few will be revolutionary. The elitist mindset of having to be the best often deters people from reading books more often. Why would you spend time reading a book, a commitment that is usually at least 10 or 15 hours, if it's not the greatest piece of fiction you've ever picked up? And why are we treating video games the same way? It feels like in recent times, a lot of us are unwilling to waste our time, and yet we doom scroll, we sit at our desks, then move to sitting on our couches, not even taking a moment to stop and enjoy the roses on our way home from work. Not bothering to pop into a local cafe or stop to meet friends because our time is so precious that we need to go spend it loafing around at home. Returning to gaming as a way of playing, especially with those in other parts of the world, it brings back a small part of the daily routine that we're missing: whimsy. Why do we think it's so weird or cringe to see adults or ourselves playing make-believe with children? Surely a lot of us have done Dungeons and Dragons or role-played with friends in a video game, or tried to bend and break the rules of a particular game to do something that you want to do. Even a sandbox game like Minecraft is a huge use of our imagination. We put value into artistic creations in society, and yet in our daily lives we try and stifle our creativity and refuse to nurture it. Before you comment, absolutely, a large majority of this has to do with the public school system in America. And Canada, I don't disagree. But once you're an adult, there's something to be said for taking a cooking class or painting with friends, writing in your spare time, trying to learn how to draw. Taking 30 minutes out of your day to nurture something you lost. Just because you lost it in childhood because of the way that you were treated does not mean you can't get it back. With Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo has not abandoned the idea of innovation in this console generation, but it's chosen to play it relatively safe with choosing a familiar design for consumers. The camera, the updated specs, the whole mouse thing with the Joy-Con. Sure, yeah, it's new, but I wouldn't consider any of that innovative or groundbreaking in the console arena. The SNES and Dreamcast both had a mouse that you could connect to the console, and Microsoft and Sony are notorious for copy and paste designs of consoles with new and updated hardware. Let's not forget that PlayStation Move camera and Microsoft's Kinect camera as well. Sure, different ideas, but still a camera. What's interesting about this playing it safe design is there's one area that Nintendo was known for doing that in, taking a significant risk only a few times. The former line that they kept alongside the consoles. The handheld. What started with the Game & Watch in 1980, Nintendo didn't deviate a lot from the original design until the Nintendo DS in 2004. That's 24 years of give or take the same design, just with more capabilities from a hardware perspective. Nintendo didn't just have consoles, some successes and some failures for the company to lean on. The Game Boy and the DS in particular are credited for keeping the company afloat during trying times. Nintendo's handheld devices didn't just allow for accessibility in gaming for those with less funds. The Nintendo DS saved Nintendo during the 2000s. There's a fantastic write-up on this from the Rolling Stones all about the Nintendo DS and how it was more than the handheld that saved Nintendo. The Nintendo DS predicted the future of gaming, at least for Nintendo. But one of my favorite parts of the article is a quote from Hiroshi Yamauchi, the then board of directors for Nintendo. "If the DS succeeds, we will rise to heaven, but if it fails, we will sink to hell." Nintendo took one of the biggest gambles any company could in the gaming space. They put it all on the line with the DS. It was in 2004, when the DS launched, that Nintendo would change the gaming space and the way they interacted with it forever. Gone would be upgrading graphics, changing the controller design, and making a better looking system. It was now about one thing for Nintendo: innovation, and again, playfulness. The N64 and GameCube are both fundamentally different systems, but the real innovation took center stage with the Wii, Wii U, and Nintendo Switch. And it was such an interesting move that Nintendo decided to stop production of the Nintendo 3DS and put the handheld line to bed in 2020. At least for now. If we look back at the announcement trailer for the Nintendo Switch, I think this was the plan all along. We just didn't know it yet. The console's premiere trailer, the idea of lifting the Nintendo Switch off the dock and playing it handheld instead of on a TV and looking directly at the market that Nintendo already controlled, handhelds. Nintendo's only real competitor in the handheld space at the time was itself in the DS, and more recently Pocket emulators have stepped up. For years, people have purchased the PlayStation Portable and the PlayStation Vita to hack and emulate older games on. Pocket emulators are just a much easier way to access that for those who don't already have a Vita laying around or want less control over the way that they emulate. With Nintendo shifting its focus into the handheld arena and taking away the risk of a console, it sets the company up for a better future. Right? Well, enter the Steam Deck. Steam has paid Nintendo one of the biggest compliments by launching the Steam Deck, allowing a direct competitor for the Nintendo indie scene that has slowly taken over. You don't necessarily buy a Nintendo Switch for the first-party games, especially considering the Nintendo Switch Lite is only $199 US. You sometimes just buy it because you want to play games like Hades on the go. Or at least that's how it was. The idea of a portable console captured the hearts of gamers, especially those with only one family TV. Parents who are older and want to be able to game when kids are watching TV or continue playing when a partner turns on a movie. This eternal fight for the living room TV has finally ceased, and in its place is the Nintendo Switch, PlayStation Portal, and Steam Deck. Although the PlayStation Portal is effectively a large accessory for the PlayStation 5, and a pricey one at that, the Steam Deck is a standalone portable PC that allows you to enjoy a cheaper library, a console with no online subscription service, and accessibility to games you've already purchased and left rotting in the Steam store likely. The sudden portable PC concept that Steam kicked off has changed gaming on the go once again and helped shift the market from console gamers into handheld gamers. Even Microsoft is considering making a competitor, and if I'm being honest, they're the perfect candidate for things like the Windows Store and Game Pass. It's heavily rumored that we'll be getting a sort of Xbox on the go next generation. Gaming has entered a new era, I think, and the Nintendo Switch is the pioneer into the unknown. But Nintendo can no longer play it safe with a handheld, affordable system keeping the company line afloat while they experiment with consoles. They've entered into new territory for Nintendo. These consoles have to succeed consistently. With the fallback of the Game Boy and DS taken out of the equation, if a disaster happens again for Nintendo, like the N64 and GameCube sales back to back, it's going to be rough waters for the company. Thus, the Nintendo Switch 2. We haven't really seen a direct sequel to a console from Nintendo outside of the handhelds they've released. Sure, the Wii U was there in name, but it was just different enough to confuse most people and keep them from purchasing the console. I think Wii 2 would have been genuinely a better name for the company, or to separate from the idea of the Wii while still carrying over some components like the controllers. But in my opinion, that's where the really interesting stuff just begins with a Nintendo Switch 2. And this is just some armchair analysis from someone who likes video games a little bit too much. I'm not an expert, I haven't researched price points in the way a market analyst has. Nintendo could be completely right in the way that they're going to charge for the Nintendo Switch 2. But in my opinion, the problem comes in two parts. The release timing of the Nintendo Switch 2 and also, well, the price. Although these two parts sort of go hand in hand, the easier one to deal with is release timing. There are two console releases in the past that we can point to, and maybe it has nothing to do with when they came out, but I think there is something to be said about keeping your launch windows similar to your competitors. People maybe aren't ready to buy new systems yet if you're too early, and if you're too late, they've probably already bought the other system. The first is the Sega Dreamcast. Released in 1998 and caught sort of in between two console generations, well, it didn't sell super well, and Sega's Dreamcast was by all means a revolutionary console. Heck, they even paid for internet for a year in Japan for customers who bought Phantasy Star Online to push the console forward and into the limelight. The Dreamcast had a built-in modem. It was the first console to have internet. It was one of the first consoles to feature using CDs instead of cartridges, crossplay with PC, second screen technology through the VMU, and a revolutionary set of games in Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, Phantasy Star Online. I'd like to say Crazy Taxi, but maybe I'm alone in that. The Dreamcast launched 2 years ahead of the PlayStation 2, maybe trying to get ahead of the curve after the poor showing of the Sega Saturn, or just trying to grab some people back from PlayStation to Sega. The thing is, the Dreamcast was priced way more appropriately than the Saturn. $199 USD instead of $399. Sega learned the hard way that people who buy consoles don't really want to pay over $299, and we have the stats to back that. And Sony knew this, launching the extremely sophisticated, groundbreaking technology of the PlayStation 2 at $299. PlayStation 2, we all know, would sweep the console generation and still sits on top as the best-selling video game console of all time. 2 abysmal console sales in a row for Sega forced them to throw in the towel and focus more on software development versus hardware development in the form of consoles. Alongside the PS2 was also the N64, which interestingly released 2 years after the PlayStation 2. The late showing from Nintendo got them 32 million sales. The N64 was also priced at $199, and it turns out that extra $100 to get everything the PlayStation 2 was offering was enough incentive for most people. The PlayStation 2 showed up the former Goliath of the 80s and 90s Nintendo. The timing of those 2 release windows was likely a little off for the Dreamcast and the N64, as most consoles that win a generation are priced lower than competitors while still offering similar value. I believe the PlayStation 2 is an outlier of winning a console generation at $299 with competitors priced at $199. And on top of that is one of the best-selling consoles of all time. The N64 sales, followed by the GameCube, is what almost put the nail in the coffin for Nintendo as a company. But Nintendo knows through experience the reality of poor sales on multiple consoles and how much pricing can affect your sales. When the SNES launched, Nintendo had a chokehold on its video game market. Its competitor, the Sega Genesis, came in and undercut Nintendo by only $10. That changed everything for Nintendo. Although the SNES outsold the Genesis, it wasn't by much, and it allowed Sega to grab a huge cut of the market for that console generation. But if you look at the sales of each console generation and who won each generation, no console has ever priced above $299 and won a generation of consoles with one exception: the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, or 9th console generation. The starting point for the PlayStation 5 was $499 at launch for the full console, and they've shipped 75 million units but only sold 50 million units. This also includes the PlayStation 5 Pro, which, although I can't find solid numbers on, is probably close to 10 million units sold, and that's likely some players upgrading their original PlayStation 5 console. Let's be clear, 50 million units for the PlayStation line in particular is not a great showing. I also would argue that the 9th generation is labeled a little wrong. The 9th generation of consoles is the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series by itself. In 2012, Nintendo launched the Wii U. In 2013, both the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One launched. It wouldn't be until 2017, 5 years after the initial start of the 8th generation, that the Nintendo Switch would launch worldwide. It was in 2020 when the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series would launch, kicking off the 9th generation of consoles. We've seen in other console generations that sometimes a console fails and a company tries again, so they get lumped in together. The 9th generation of consoles is touted for bringing in 4K and 8K resolution, 60 frames per second, and SSDs on the consoles, so significant hardware upgrades. I believe the Switch 2 topped out at 4K and 60 FPS when docked, which I'm fairly certain leaves it out of the 9th generation as well. Not to mention, the next Xbox is rumored to launch in 2027. Where does this leave the Nintendo Switch 2 in terms of console generations? The way we define these so-called console generations are a little infuriating at times, because it seems to be that, out of recent years, it's simply when Xbox and PlayStation decide to upgrade hardware that we're in a new generation. The modern rivalry of Xbox and PlayStation is certainly what we think of when it comes to gaming sales, but Nintendo has been around the whole time, even if it's just in the background, happily selling Game Boys, or blowing everyone out of the water with the Wii. They've been there. The company is still trekking along in the home entertainment system war, offering unique and innovative consoles along the way. We likely wouldn't have the Steam Deck or PlayStation Portal without Nintendo's help, at least not for a while. I believe that the 9th generation is truly the Nintendo Switch alongside the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, but even if it was, it means the 8th generation was won with a console pricing at $399. Now that we've gone through that quick side tangent, there is still one singular outlier in the entire history of gaming that has successfully priced consoles above $299 and done well in terms of sales and overtaking that section of the industry, even if just temporarily. Whatever way you want to look at it, it's either going to be the PlayStation 4 at $399 or the PlayStation 5 at $499. There you go. For Nintendo to be bold enough to launch a console that is still lacking some of the hardware that PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series has at a price of $449 USD, it's something. I don't personally believe the Nintendo Switch 2 has the weight behind it that we think it does. Lots of people own multiple Switches. Since it's priced low enough and intended to be a portable console that can be docked, you don't need to buy just one for the family. This isn't a hub console like Microsoft or Sony that can charge a premium for being entertainment for everyone. The Nintendo Switch is more or less a personal console. And this personal console sold okay at first, but it really hit its stride during the global lockdown for COVID-19. Picture this. You've been told, as many were during that time, to stay inside for 2 weeks. Well, we all remember it was a lot longer than 2 weeks for most of us, and something interesting launched at the beginning of those 2 weeks: Animal Crossing New Horizons. Animal Crossing is not a game that sells systems. It sold a little over 4 million copies for the Wii, which that console sold over 100 million units, meaning that less than 5% of people who owned a Wii owned Animal Crossing City Folk. Apparently, Animal Crossing on the GameCube sold 2.3 million. Wild World sits pretty around 11 million, and New Leaf, which, by the way, sales only spiked after New Horizons, has sold 13 million. The biggest release by far is New Horizons, at over 45 million units sold. That's still only like 1/3 of consoles that have that, by the way. Now, part of this is, of course, people owning more than one Switch. So with the Switch spiking during the pandemic, which hopefully doesn't happen again anytime soon, and people owning multiple systems, this new price point feels like it's really going to hit Nintendo hard. This is no longer a console testing the waters to expunge the portable line from Nintendo. It has become the handheld system, and a portable system for $449 USD? On top of the overpriced console system, there is something else to compete with. Nintendo is increasing the prices of their games. $80 USD. The kicker, if you want to buy physical games, well, the physical copies aren't really physical. They're more like a digital code inside a cartridge. We aren't talking about connecting to the internet for day one patches, we're talking about downloading an entire game from the eShop instead of being loaded onto a cartridge. It's essentially a key to buy a game that you could have just bought from the eShop and downloaded from the eShop. Look, I know we don't want to talk about it again, but the race for video game preservation has been on for a while now. And Nintendo has been one of the biggest deterrents for backing up things like source codes and archives. This additional way of axing physical games just feels like a punch to the gut. Why even bother with the physical cases at this point? Just move full digital and wear it on your sleeve. Except they're probably worried consumers will push back. Don't worry, we already are with the price of games and the console. Nintendo is at a crossroads, and it feels like Nintendo is entering into the we'll update the hardware every 10 years boring old race Microsoft and Sony have been in for a while. Yes, the Nintendo Switch sold well. But is it going to sell well again at an increased price point, no global pandemic to boost the sales that we can foresee, and the lack of titles at the start? Nintendo handhelds tend to have a cheaper or lower version of the system within 2 years of release. I think, if anything, that's when we'll see more people pick up the system. They also have a slow trickle of content planned, I'm sure, as Nintendo always does. But at this price point, the indies aren't going to help sell a console. If Nintendo can break the mold and become the best-selling console at this price point and continue to propel the Switch forward, I'll be interested to see it. Good for Nintendo. But I'll be honest in saying I don't see that happening, especially with the competitor of the Steam Deck kicking around in the background, a Microsoft portable console with likely more power rumored to be on the way, the PlayStation 5 Portal, and more retro gaming systems just showing up. This, by all means, feels like an uphill battle for Nintendo. My name is Elena, and you've been listening to Beyond the Button Mash. You can join the discussion for each episode in the YouTube comments or on Discord. Beyond the Button Mash is available on major podcasting platforms like YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks for listening.